We have to make sure that the politicians are held accountable.
Every administration had the ability to put a ban on asbestos.
When it comes to asbestos, it really is about power, money, and politics.
Our next speaker is Pat Martin. For those of you on social media, I'm going to read a quick bio. Pat, former Canadian Member of Parliament, is a carpenter and former asbestos miner who served as a Canadian Member of Parliament for six terms from 1997 to 2015. He served as his party's spokesperson on labor, immigration, Aboriginal affairs, public accounts, and government affairs, and was always an outspoken critic of his country's policy on asbestos, and a leader in the effort to ban its use. He was honored by ADAO in 2006 with an award in recognition of his contribution to the international struggle to rid the world of asbestos. Welcome, Pat.
Well, thank you, Ellen, and thank you, Linda, for making it possible for my partner Jenny and I to be with you here today again. 2006, Linda, long time ago, and I have nothing but good memories from those early days. I believe it was earlier than that, the first time we met, when you were a fledgling organization, 2005, the conference itself was a press conference, wasn't it, at the National Press Gallery here in Washington, D.C. I had the pleasure, the honor of meeting Alan, sitting across the dinner table with your husband Alan and Emily, who was a little girl at that time, but a precocious and bright, articulate young woman that she's grown into today. It's a real pleasure. Those times, let me just say something about the organization first before my remarks. It's a rare thing for a grassroots organization like ADAO to not only thrive and prosper as you have, but to survive at all, frankly. So many well-meaning grassroots activist organizations collapse under their own weight after a number of years, or they subdivide themselves into factions and fail to really be able to carry on. This is 14 years of exponential growth, and it comes down to leadership. Let's not, you really can't sidestep that issue. Without one single driving force and a clear vision and boundless energy, you really can't steer this, institutional supertanker that effectively for that long. So Linda, it's such a pleasure to see you again today, and after an absence of a number of years, to see what ADAO has become in the interim. It's really spectacular. Thank you. Linda asked me, and thank you for making a bit of time on your incredibly busy agenda for me to say a few words, but Linda asked me to just share with you a little bit my journey with asbestos and how it's affected me, and my exposure or journey with asbestos is both personal and professional. I was an asbestos miner as a young man, as a very young man. Not a career choice I would recommend to anybody, but if you wouldn't stay in school, your options are more limited. I remember I turned 18 in a asbestos mine, and I remember this because I walked into the bar and said, "Give me a beer. I'm of legal age as of today, and I can have a beer here." And the guy said, "Wait a minute, you've been in here every night for the last 6 months. It means I've been serving you illegally all this time." But I can tell you the conditions then, this is the early 1970s, the conditions were horrific. I won't go into a lot of detail because you've seen many examples of what conditions were like in those days. The industry was lying to us about the health hazards of asbestos then. We were heavily exposed. When you first start in an asbestos mine like that, it was a mill and a mine, so we mined the ore, but we also processed it into the fluffy, innocuous-looking cotton-like material that you see today. And so I was working in the bagging room, I remember, when you first started, where 100-pound loads, you press a button with your foot and a 100-pound load of asbestos would come shooting down into a big bag in a flurry of dust, and you would push that along and another bag would come. So for a long period of time, we did get a heavy exposure. My union at the time was trying to draw attention to the detail, fight for better ventilation, etc. This was in the northern part of the Yukon Territory, which, if you know Canada at all, is the extreme north. You really weren't around any kind of resources or health and safety specialists who might come and give you some help. But the union was there right from the beginning, and I think that's when my activism started, right there in those early days, and the frustration we had in trying to make our case and to appeal for those basic health and safety protocols that we would expect today. But moving along, then, I did find, as we researched more, it was disappointing to me and shocking to me that in Canada, not only were we one of the world's largest producers and exporters of asbestos in the world, the government of Canada was heavily, heavily subsidizing the industry and promoting the industry. I mean, as I learned later in life, there was an organization called the Government-Funded Asbestos Institute that would send trade missions around the world, like I think a term that Barry used in his book, like globe-trotting propagandists for the asbestos industry. I think they were bragging on their website 160 trade missions in 60 different countries. I don't know of any other Canadian commodity that enjoyed that level of government-supported promotion. I really don't. We were exporting human misery on a monumental scale using taxpayers' dollars to promote it. These are the kind of shocking things that I learned later in life. I later became, on a personal level, I later became a journeyman carpenter and the head of the Carpenters Union. And we have a building trades, council of the building trades in the regions of Canada where we meet, same as the United States. Of those 12 people, one for each of the building trades, 3 out of the 12 succumbed to asbestos-related disease. And I should name them here because this is a brunch that is partly a tribute to victims as well. Dennis Wilk, the head of the Heat Frost Insulators Union, died of mesothelioma. John Bedome, the head of the Painters Union, and they got it from the drywall mud that is so ubiquitous amongst the building industry, was heavily laced, and when you sand that drywall mud, enormous amounts of asbestos released. John Bedome passed away, asbestos-related disease. And the third one was Horst Haybeck, who was the head of the Bricklayers Union, and he was also a plasterer, and they used asbestos as a binding agent in the plaster just before they applied that in the old-fashioned style of plastering. So that's 3 out of 12 of my brothers, my colleagues, in the Building Trades Council of the province I represented succumbed. I'm not good at math, but I think that's 25% of the people around that table. So I think this would have been in the early 90s. My activism was rapidly turning into anger, and I think that's frankly, Eric, I have greatest respect for you for the restraint that you show, because anger is the appropriate response to some of the outrageous things that the government of Canada has been complicit with. I mean, I love my country, but I hang my head in shame the level of participation or the level of culpability that we have for this worldwide made in Canada epidemic that we foisted around the world. I became a member of Parliament in 1997, and I can tell you that, well, first of all, I was very proud to see the Canadian Member of Parliament here yesterday, Sheri Benson. I almost bust a gut with pleasure to see her announcing that there has been some breakthroughs in Canada, finally. I was so proud of her, but I can't take any credit for the good work she's doing, but I can tell you that from 1997 on, I never missed an opportunity in the House of Commons of Canada to raise this issue as often and as frequently as I could, to rub their nose in the reality of the damage they were doing and the harm they were doing. I used to call it corporate welfare for corporate serial killers for the way they were funding that industry. I used to present the same petition day after day after day. I would send them out around the country, and people would send them back in, and then you're allowed to table it in the House of Commons. And I would have it planned so virtually every day I could stand up and read the same petition over and over again, to the point where other members of Parliament were mouthing it with me as I recited the same words. And as Linda made the point yesterday, it doesn't always, push the ball over the goal line or anything, but the more you raise it, the more times it's evident, the more times you expose people to the issue, finally, sooner or later, it reaches critical mass and it resonates and it becomes legislation. Now, we're almost there in Canada. Hopefully, I don't know if it'll be in this government administration, but the number of times that you've successfully, Linda, put forward legislation in the American legislatures, I have no doubt that you will eventually succeed. Those are really the things that I wanted to share with you. The pleasure it's been to be associated with this organization, the pride I have in what you, largely Linda, with your incredible team, progress you've made in elevating the status, punching way above your weight with a tiny budget to be an effective force to be reckoned with amongst all the lobbyists on K Street. You're right in there with 1/1000th of the budget, Linda, so you're doing a wonderful job. And I'd be proud to stay involved in any way that I can to support that. Thank you for allowing us to be here. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Oh, thank you.